Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. We are back to the future today. We are reunited with Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics. I'm Matt Manocherian. Mark Simon's off today. We've got Justin with us producing. But the Football Outsiders Almanac was released this week. It is available now. You got to go get it. You can get it through your FO Plus subscription, which you probably already have. But just in case, the Almanac is out. Get it now. And the all-time leader in Off the Charts podcast appearances, Aaron, is back with us. Aaron, what is new with you and what's new with this year's book?
Hey, I'm doing well. Life is good. The big new thing are these Twitch shows that Football Outsiders is doing. For those who don't know, we're now on twitch.tv/FB Outsiders. And we're on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then in August, we're going to start doing fantasy shows at Tuesdays at 1 p.m. And then when we get to the regular season, we're supposed to be doing 5 days a week. So it's going to be a little bit nuts broadcasting about football on twitch.tv. And the other big news is all the hard work we do for 3 months is over, and Football Outsiders Almanac 2021 is now out, both the digital edition and the print edition at Amazon.
Well, congratulations. I've been loving watching you on Thursdays with Mike. That's been another blast from the past right there, but also something new.
Yes, Mike Tanier is Football Outsiders for the first time is a full-time employee now. Like, Tanier has been writing for us part-time for like 16 years and is now a full-time Football Outsiders writer. That is where you're going to find his writing this year.
That is colossal. And of course, Scott Spratt on the fantasy show, former SISer. And you said every day you're going to be twitching during the season?
Monday through Friday. That is the plan. Yes.
I can't wait to see it. That's huge.
3 days hosted by me, 2 days hosted by Scott.
I've been enjoying throwing it on. I'm in my mid-Thursday meetings trying to wrap up things from the week and get through that. And getting to see you guys up there has been awesome. All right, let's get into the book, because I'm sure we could just kind of ramble on all day. But the people are here to hear about the Almanac. Let's highlight some things in it. And I got to start off with one of my favorite things to peruse around every year, the year in quotes, a perennial favorite. What's the most interesting quote, and what is the funniest quote from the year in quotes of the pandemic season?
My favorite quote is always whatever we make the quote of the year. And it's not as good as the time that Al Michaels said about Jared Allen, that wherever you go, 69 is in your face. But Robbie Anderson not understanding that his new team had a mascot is probably my favorite quote of the year, when he was like, "Who is Sir Purr? Are you like, what up, Sir Purr?" Like, he doesn't understand the concept of a mascot. The other thing is Cam Newton's nicknames. I had to try to figure out who Cam Newton is talking about with all these nicknames. I mean, Highway 11 was clearly Julian Edelman, but I don't know who's Bo Diddley and which Patriots players were twin number 1 and twin number 2. That's the McCourties, I guess. Buzzo, Winnie the Pooh, Smokin' Joe, Crazy Legs, Dirty Dave, Bent Dog. He had a lot of really good nicknames for the rest of the Patriots last year.
Yeah, I'd never underestimate NFL players' ability to give each other nicknames. That is something that probably goes further than their athletic ability. I didn't think you were going to be able to beat the year in Dan Campbell, but I was with you. My favorite quote also was Sir Purr. I had to reread it a couple times because I hadn't heard this one from, I guess, whenever it went down. But Sir Purr,
Dan Campbell wanting to break your kneecaps was pretty good. Yeah,
that's probably the most memorable one. But I love your choice there. Always fun to look through the year in quotes. I think especially this year with just what a peculiar year it was. There was some really.
I liked someone asking Sean Murphy Bunting from the Bucs why they were playing so far away from receivers, and his answer was COVID.
That's a good answer. That's reasonable. He's thinking ahead. Okay, on to the football. The projected wins, obviously, something that we break down. We like to break it down every year. Before we get into it, I'll point out last year I asked you, why are the Bucs so high on this list? I think they were second in projected wins. I think the season spoke for itself as far as that one went.
They were second or third, yeah.
And here we go again. So let's look at that, and let's look right at the top. Because first thing, once again, that jumps out to me is I think the Bucs are too high. The Bucs are number 1. The Ravens are number 2. Obviously, the Bucs won the Super Bowl. But despite losing the Super Bowl, I would have expected the Chiefs to be the team to beat. So what is driving that? What is driving the Chiefs being number 3 there at 10.5 wins when Vegas has them going 12-5?
Yeah, I also would have thought the Chiefs would be the team to beat. And I will admit, first of all, that our simulation tends to be very conservative. I do need to do some research at some point and figure out whether this is too conservative, whether there's a way to make it a little bit more open to where the best teams come out better and the worst teams come out worse. But we usually have the best teams a little worse than Vegas, and we have the worst teams a little better than Vegas. Kansas City, what's happening here is two things. One is their offense is not so far ahead of the rest of the league that they completely dominate in every way. And it's possible that we're missing something there because we always had this problem with the Patriots. Like, we never had the Patriots projected quite high enough. Like, they were so consistently good every year. And usually the fact is good teams, there's going to be a range of possibilities there. But the Patriots seem to always finish, at least in the middle, if not the top of their range of possibilities. And I don't know if we're having the same problem with Kansas City. The other thing is defense. So they're the number 1 projected offense and the number 5 projected special teams, but they're the number 22 defense. Whereas Tampa Bay and Baltimore, the teams ahead of them, are top 5 offenses with top 10 defenses. So the reason why we don't have Kansas City number 1 is even though defense is harder to project than offense, so we project, like, offenses are projected at a range that's much wider than defenses. But even with that caveat, the likelihood is that the defense in Kansas City is not as good as the defenses in Baltimore and Tampa Bay. And that's what has Baltimore and Tampa Bay a little bit ahead.
Yeah, that's super interesting what you mentioned, like how the Patriots were just perpetually kind of impossible to rate. And maybe it's just that, when you're looking at football teams, the Patriots were somewhat different than the other 31 for a while there in the way that they had things going. And therefore, any system that considers all of the teams might be missing something about the Patriots and kind of what makes them different.
And I think that's completely possible with Patrick Mahomes. Like, it's possible that Mahomes is so good and so consistent that a system that considers all teams is going to miss something that makes Mahomes so consistently good. So if you asked me, like, which of the teams that we have lower than Vegas would I actually put money on? The fact is I wouldn't put money on Kansas City. And in fact, when we do our preseason picks, like our personal picks, not what the system picks, I'm going to pick Kansas City to win the Super Bowl.
And that's totally reasonable. I think just like we talked about, the Bucs were surprisingly high for us last year. Sometimes the intuition is going to point out a reason why maybe the system's not behaving correctly. And sometimes the system's right, despite what me and you think.
Yeah, the Bucs being number 1, I totally understand why the Bucs are number 1. Because first of all, they are so talented on both offense and defense. They have their only hole is depth, right? If they have a lot of injuries, they are screwed because at most positions, their depth is bad. But if they have a medium number of injuries or a low number of injuries like they had last year, they also have one of the easiest schedules in the league. So that's why they come out significantly ahead of the top AFC teams, because their schedule is so easy, not just that they're so good.
Yeah, pretty good, huh? You win the Super Bowl your first year with Tom Brady, and then the 30th ranked expected strength of schedule. I wanted to flip back to that point you were talking about in how your projections might be a little bit tighter together than the Vegas projections, which aren't actually projections. They're reflections on the betting market, really, which is different. But I think this is something that you'll find, the more research that we do into understanding these different sorts of betting markets is that pretty much any projection system is rightfully going to have a different distribution than what actually happens on the field, so to speak, right? Like, if you were trying to maximize the correct projections of wins, you wouldn't be projecting teams to have 13, 14 wins or 2 or 3 wins in the season, despite the fact that maybe 1 or 2 teams are likely to do that. Just predicting which team that's going to be is probably a fool's errand.
Right. We do. The fact is we do for this simulation 1 million simulations, right? And even during the season, every week, we do 50,000 simulations. So in some of those simulations, there are teams that go 15-2, 16-1. In something like 0.5% of simulations, Tampa Bay goes undefeated. Like, it's those things happen. But when you average all the simulations, you end up where no team is better than 11-6 and no team is worse than 6-11 because the range of possibilities is so wide.
Looking at the Chiefs, all right, let's go like a little bit more into football than kind of the meta there. The thing for me that I look at as the storyline for them, it's not Mahomes, Kelsey, Tyreek Hill. Is the defense going to be good? It's what bit them in the Super Bowl, the offensive line, and how they completely rebuilt.
So much work on it. I mean, they have so much depth now on the offensive line that I can't see that being a huge problem for them this year. Like, they can suffer some injuries and they don't have the depth at tackle that they do in the interior, right? So right tackle is still a weakness. I think that Mike Remmers is supposed to be the starting right tackle. And if Orlando Brown gets hurt at left tackle, they're in trouble. But they could have injuries on the interior of that offensive line and be fine.
Yeah, I'm really curious about how things will pan out because in one sense, the players are better. They have better players on their offensive line. They've invested in it and they should be better there. And in another sense, I worry about specifically that position group needing time to gel together. Practice time has been so weird, not just this year, but going back to last year. I think it's really going to be an important time for them. And I think, going back to the Chiefs mirroring the Patriots, we might see the first month of the season, there might be some growing pains like we kind of typically see with a Belichick team, where I don't know if the team that we'll see in the second half of the year will be the same as the first half of the year. That's what I'm looking towards. I'm really curious to see. I love some of the players they brought in on that offensive line with the Brown and Kyle Long. But are these guys going to be able to gel together? Are they going to be able to get the right five? Like you said, they have a bunch of guys. We don't even know who the five are going to be probably on day one. That's the thing that I'm really curious about with this Chiefs team. But I do think it probably projects well by the time we get to January.
It also matters their defense, because the fact is that if their defense is 22nd, like we expect, then the Chiefs are very good, but they're not superlative. If the Chiefs, defense being more inconsistent, if they suddenly have a good defense or even a great defense, if the Chiefs could put up a top 5 defense, they'd be one of the all-time greatest teams in NFL history. So what that defense can do and the inconsistency of defense matters a lot.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's keep it moving, and we'll go from the Chiefs to the Patriots. So the Patriots, number 5 in projected wins. That also stood out to me. They're just one spot behind the division rival Buffalo Bills. On one hand, they're projected to be below average on offense, which makes sense. But on the other hand, they have the weakest projected schedule in the NFL. What's the case for your Patriots?
Yeah, the case for the Patriots is a combination of 3 things. The first is special teams are the most inconsistent part of football. But there are 2 teams who we specifically have straight separately in our projections because of the way that they have been so consistent on special teams. And those 2 teams are New England and Baltimore. And you can probably count on New England and Baltimore to have top 10 special teams units, probably top 5 special teams units every year. So we have the Patriots with the top special teams projection, and that makes a difference. The other is their defense we have projected as rebounding back into the top 5 in the league. So one of the variables in the defensive projections is based on defensive value over replacement in the Pro Football Reference AV stat. So we add together like all the players with AV over 3 who've arrived on a team, and then we subtract all the players who've left. If you do that calculation, the Patriots have more added defensive talent than any team since 2003.
Wow.
Between all the free agents that they signed and getting Dante Hightower back.
Yeah, I mean, it's some of the names, Matt Judon, Davin Godchaux, Kyle Van Noy coming back, and then, of course, the secondary, which is mostly the same.
The secondary mostly carries over, but Jalen Mills.
Right, Jalen Mills added in there. Just tons of people added to that defense, and tons of people added to the offense as well. Obviously, with the 2 tight ends, Johnny Smith and Hunter Henry coming in there. This is going to be like a Greg Roman type of offense, maybe even more so than it was last year, I think. It seems like double down on Cam Newton unless it's the Mac Jones show.
Right, and that's why the offense is projected to be, we have them 20th, not like 26th or 27th, because when you add in all the talent that they added on offense, Like their offense looks like it's going to be kind of average, not particularly bad. I mean, we have them below average, but not that much below average. Now, here's the interesting thing. The Patriots and the Pittsburgh Steelers have almost the same projection on offense and defense, with the difference being that the Patriots have the number one special teams projection while the Steelers are average. And the Patriots have the easiest projected schedule, while the Steelers have the second hardest projected schedule.
And so then end up on opposite sides of the win totals.
Well, we still have the Steelers. We have the Steelers higher than I think a lot of people think. We have them averaging 8.8. So we have them on the upper half of the league, but we have the Patriots a lot higher than them.
Right. Number one defense for Pittsburgh, if they can rebound back to how they were playing in the first half of last year. It seems like it was a long time ago. What were they, 10-0?
Yeah, I mean, the offense fell too, but the defense fell. But the defense didn't fall that much.
Oh, yeah, much more faith in the defense.
The defense has been so consistent over the last. They have been number one in adjusted sack rate for 3 straight years.
Wow, that is pretty impressive. Yeah, I don't have too many questions on defense. Obviously, more uncertainty year to year there. Towards the second half of last year, though, it just became like the most telegraphed offense that I can remember in a while, where it was like, okay, they're passing here. There's no possibility of a run. That makes it easier to defend you. I will say I like the Patriots offense just coming back there, not to be explosive, but to be able to control the ball. I think they've got a great offensive line, 2 really good tight ends. I have faith in either Cam with his athleticism or Mac Jones with just the accuracy and kind of game management skills that he's displayed. I don't think that they're going to be outscoring teams, but I think they might make it a difficult matchup just in that they might hold the ball for 40 minutes in half of their games.
Cam is such a question mark because there are reasons to believe that he should be better than last year with a full off season to learn the system, with better receivers, and without whatever happened to him after he had COVID. Remember how good he looked in the first couple games of the season, and then he got COVID, and when he came back, he couldn't hit anybody. On the other hand, his shoulder may just be that those first 2 games were a little bit out of the norm, and his shoulder is just shot, and he'll never come back to being the Cam Newton that we knew 6 years ago.
But the good news is you have Plan B if that is the case now.
Yeah, he's just such a question mark. But yeah, they've got Plan B. If Newton can't play, they'll try Mac Jones, and they'll see what they have. And Mac Jones is probably the lowest ceiling, highest floor of. Well, Trevor Lawrence is the highest floor, but he's the lowest ceiling, but a fairly high floor of this year's 5 prospects.
Right, you think you know what you're getting, and knowing what you're not getting as well. All right, staying on the quarterback front, San Francisco and Dallas both figure to get their injured quarterbacks back this year. Both are projected to jump back up into the top 10 in wins after down years. Which of those 2 teams do you have more confidence in?
We have San Francisco higher than Dallas, but if you ask me who I personally have more confidence in, I have more confidence in Dallas.
I think I'm with you there.
I have more confidence in Dak Prescott than I do in particular, if they decide to go with Lance. I think rookie quarterbacks are still a good bet to struggle, even when they're in good offensive systems. The San Francisco defense should be much better, but I worry a little bit about their secondary, especially because, we're kind of counting on Jason Verrett to not get hurt, and that hasn't been a very good gamble in history.
Well, if you looked up our injury risk projections and things like that, what I would tell you is that players that you expect to get injured are often not as likely to get injured as you would think. I think we do an overcorrection in our minds of, we all know that if you've been injured before, you're likely to be injured again. But in terms of the actual likelihood, I think we kind of overcorrect. That's why it's nice to have numbers to figure this sort of stuff out. In terms of confidence, I think of I wish I could do Kyle Shanahan with Dak Prescott, because it's the Niners quarterback situation that makes me have questions, and it's the Cowboys coaching situation that makes me have questions. Maybe it was a bad first year, and with Dak healthy and the system getting into place, Dallas can get it together. I'm bullish on their offensive line. I'm always bullish on their offensive line, especially with those guys getting healthy again. I think they've got great receivers. Them and the Broncos are arguably some of the best receivers groups in the league that I don't think anybody's talking about in that sort of context. And Dak and Zeke, I mean, this is a legit offense. They'll have a new defensive system from where they were last year. But then Yeah, you go back over to the Niners and kind of everything else about the team seems to be really fitting into place well. They barely practiced. I don't see how you could possibly have Trey Lance come in and start when they've canceled half of their practices going on over the offseason. He's as raw a prospect as I can remember. I think it's much more likely that he comes in. I wouldn't call it a Taysom Hill role, but something analogous to that, where he's maybe the Jalen Hurts role. Is that not the same role? I don't know.
Here's the thing I'd say about the coaches, though, just to briefly say, I'm a little higher on Mike McCarthy than other people are. Like, I worry that his offense is nothing but the same three routes over and over again, but he is at least aggressive on fourth downs and aggressive places that we want coaches to be aggressive. And Kyle Shanahan is surprisingly conservative in those situations.
So when it comes down to that good old fourth down decision making, it makes sense that we know now that McCarthy has drank the Kool-Aid and he's going to be pushing on fourth downs, even if he hates every second of it. All right, let's keep going around the league. Let's talk about Green Bay and New Orleans, two other teams also ranking in the top 10. But I'm curious to hear how the projection specifically considers their quarterback situations, because I know you'll make specific accommodations for that. So Aaron Rodgers threatening to hold out. Don't know what to make of that. Drew Brees obviously retiring, looking like Jameis Winston's team coming forward, but not totally sold on there. How do the projections consider those?
Okay, for Green Bay, we just did Aaron Rodgers. We had to decide what to do with the projections, and we decided we were going to leave Aaron Rodgers on Green Bay. We had to do the same decision with Houston, and we made the opposite decision with Houston. With Houston, we thought Deshaun Watson's not going to play this year because of his legal problems, as well as his desire to be traded. With Green Bay, we went with the idea that Aaron Rodgers will be back. So the Green Bay projection is based entirely on Aaron Rodgers being there, and they're projected as the number 2 offense in the league. For New Orleans, and this will come up later, but Denver also, we split the projection between 2 quarterbacks. So if we had just Jameis Winston as the quarterback, we would actually have New Orleans even higher. But this is half Winston and half Hill. And with that, they come out with an average offense and then the number 3 defensive projection. I don't think people realize how good and consistently good and how strong at every position the New Orleans defense is. And so we have the defense propping up that team very likely and keeping them good. If Jameis Winston, other than the year he threw 900,000 interceptions, Jameis Winston was generally like the 16th best quarterback in the league. I know people think he's a bad quarterback because he's a little bit more interception prone, and he had that one year with the ridiculous number of interceptions. But some of that, I think, is Arians' offense. Bruce Arians is like, quarterbacks always throw more interceptions when they go to Bruce Arians' offenses. So I think if he starts for the Saints, he goes back to throwing 20, not 30. And he goes back to being like the 16th best quarterback in the league. And with their defense, if their defense is what we think it is, that's a playoff team.
I got to say, I have a tremendous amount of confidence in Sean Payton, and this is completely my bias speaking from being around. But I think that he and Drew Brees have masked a lot of deficiencies in the Saints for years. It's funny now that you talk about the defense potentially masking the deficiencies offensively, but I still think Sean Payton is just so good at running an offense that I think Jameis Winston, like you say, is underrated. I don't think he'll have the opportunity to throw 20 interceptions. I think if it starts going in that direction, I think Coach Payton will get him out of here. I don't think he has patience for that. But I'm with you. It's hard for me to imagine him throwing for less than 4,000 yards. It's hard for me to imagine him throwing, if he's given the opportunity. I'm really glad we unpacked these, because I think if people want to use the Almanac to help them make their season-long bets, it's good information to know what you're actually betting on, what these numbers are actually considering. Because if you have a different feeling on Taysom Hill versus Jameis Winston than the projections are being given, you can at least understand that. If you think that there's a really good chance that Rodgers is not going to make it to Green Bay, you can think, okay, this is pricing in Rodgers, and understand that would affect things.
Yeah, I would hope it's clear we're pricing in Rodgers. I can't imagine anybody would think that with Jordan Love at quarterback, we are projecting them to be the number 2 offense in the league.
The only thing I was wondering is if you might have done like 90% Rodgers or 95% Rodgers and then a 5%. And the same thing with Deshaun Watson. Maybe give him just like the 5% although that seems like it's not happening. I think you handled it reasonably. I think it's the most likely situations. And then you went 50-50 where it's gray. It's good to know. I do see, we were planning on talking about it a little bit forward, but I got to jump there. The Broncos you have at 8.8 wins, and Vegas sees them with a losing record, just 7.5 wins. It seems like the Broncos have such a good team. Quarterback is the only question mark. I was going to ask you a similar question. Is the 7.5 wins half Drew Lock, half Teddy Bridgewater? Is there any difference between them if you project them out? And I mean, if it's already good money to bet on the Broncos, and there's the slightest chance that they could have Aaron Rodgers, all of a sudden that becomes a really nice looking bet if that actually were to move.
I really like the Broncos over this year because even with Locke at the quarterback, we would have had them average about 8.0. With Bridgewater at quarterback, it would have been more like 9.5, and it ends up averaging at 8.8. They're going to have an above. We may not even be projecting their defense good enough. We have their defense projected number 9, and I think it's going to be better than that. And they have an easy schedule.
Yeah, they're an attractive team. I mean, if they were to get Rodgers, that's Peyton Manning all over again. But I love the receiver group. I love, if Sutton can come back and be, close to what he was before. You start to think about the weapons that they have there. The offensive line just totally turned the corner last year, went from one of the worst units in the league to actually being able to get their stuff together. They're an interesting team. And I think that's interesting. A 1.5 game difference between Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. I'm as big a Teddy Bridgewater fan as you'll meet. And that's even more than I would have expected.
It's because Lock is bad.
Oh, I love it. Let's keep going. One theme that emerges when you look at the Outsiders team win projections versus Vegas is that the lines on some of the really bad teams seem to be too low. The Vegas lines, that is. Now, this could come back to what we were saying before about the projections being just more constricted than the way that the sample, that it'll actually end up in real life. But the Lions, Texans, Jaguars, and Bengals are all very reasonably projected to be below 500 and in the bottom half of the league. But still, your system sees some value there. As crazy as it sounds, are the lines set so low that teams like the Lions or Texans might actually be a play here?
I think yes. Although I would say, okay, of those 4 teams, the one that we have projected highest over Vegas is Detroit, which we have projected at 7.2, and Vegas currently has it, I believe, like 5.
Just at 5, yeah.
The one that I would go to is Cincinnati, which we have at 7.5, and I think Vegas has it like 6 because of Joe Burrow being back and what that could mean for their offense. And they also have tended to have good special teams. We have them with the number 3 special teams projection. We have Detroit with the number 4 special teams projection. I don't know why we have this habit of over projecting Detroit. That's why I would be a little afraid of putting any money on Detroit, is that we've had this weird habit the last couple of years of over projecting Detroit, and we may be over projecting them here too. Like, even though we have them near the bottom of the league, we have their offense 18th. I think part of it is because when you are using a stat system, it's really hard to say that there's a giant difference between Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, because the argument that there's a giant difference between Goff and Stafford is almost entirely based on last year only and scouting, right? Like, scouting wise, we all want to say the Goff was driven by the scheme and was driven by Sean McVay, and Stafford was held back by scheme. And when you switch them, Stafford is going to explode and Goff is going to be terrible. And that's what a lot of people believe. But if you are considering stats, the fact is it was only 2 or 3 years ago that Goff was better than Stafford. And if you look at other players throughout history, it's not common that a quarterback switches teams and all of a sudden, because the scheme is worse, he gets way, way worse. Like, you could make that argument for Goff, and that's one of the reasons why I personally would not put money on the Lions over. But statistically, it's really hard to make that argument. And so we end up with the Lions as worse than they would be with Stafford. But it's not the huge, colossal difference that I think people believe. And this comes out, actually, I think, we have the Rams lower than Vegas. I think the Goff Stafford thing is more of an issue there, that we have the Rams lower than Vegas.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how it plays out. I agree with you. Stafford, you go back a season and a half. He was not healthy all of 2019, and he's been good on kind of questionable teams. You flip Goff, was kind of miserable last year, but before that was taking the Rams to the Super Bowl and getting paid $40 million or whatever. It's interesting to think about the way that might play out. The Lions, I know that when Matt Patricia came in there, I was randomly talking to an NFL player who I'm acquainted with, who was on the Lions at the time, and he explained to me that the culture there was beyond the worst that he had ever seen. He couldn't have been more low on them. And from that point on, I thought, yeah, the statistical systems definitely aren't getting at that. So maybe it was as simple as that, is that they were underperforming based on things that are explicitly not on the numbers.
Which would mean that would stop now, because Dan Campbell is apparently a guy who you want to run through walls for.
Right. If it's a culture thing, then maybe they hired the right guy to help with that one. The other thing I'd say, Jaguars and Bengals just with low over-unders seem like reasonable options for me. If you think that Trevor Lawrence or Joe Burrow are really going to be great quarterbacks, like this would be about the time that we would expect those things to start to pan out. So even on, if we really think Trevor Lawrence is the real deal, would it be so shocking to see him go 7-10 this year or whatever it is that he'd have to do to hit the over?
A lot of these college coaches who come to the NFL have success at first before the fact that they can't manage locker rooms comes back to bite them. I will also point out the Jaguars have our number 31 ranked schedule. So those would be two reasons that argue in favor of the Jaguars. The downside on the Jaguars is that most rookie quarterbacks do struggle, and they usually take step forward in year two, which is why I guess I would like betting on Burrow more than betting on Lawrence at this point.
I'm with you there. Texans, I don't know. They think they're tanking.
No, stay away from it.
Stay away.
I don't think that statistics can properly value the mess that the Houston Texans organization is right now. As we say in the book, right now, this is the most depressing team to root for in the Big Four American sports. And if you want to throw in MLS, you can say Big Five. Like, it's the most depressing team to root for. And I don't think we can properly.
I don't know. I'm a Tottenham Hotspur fan. I root for Tottenham Hotspur. We're about to lose Harry Kane, most likely, and I'm not nearly as depressed as I would be if I was a Texans fan. And we're kind of known for misery. So, I mean, they had depleted resources all over the place, and the one thing that they had left going for them was the quarterback, and then the offseason goes the way that it did there.
Here's the thing about the Texans. They're not that bad other than the quarterback position. All these players they've brought in, they have brought in a lot of sub-average, but better than replacement level talent. They look like a pretty good expansion team, except that a expansion team has a number one drafted quarterback, usually at quarterback, and this team has Tyrod Taylor.
Next year, they might get that opportunity.
I think that they will. But then most of those reasonable veterans that they signed are on one-year deals, so they won't be there with that number one quarterback next year.
Got to find some way to balance things out in the rebuilds as much as, I don't know, I think the analytics culture, MLB and basketball kind of tearing everything down to get that number one pick. I don't think that football, that's probably the right way of doing things. I'm not saying that it couldn't work.
No, the Texans have torn everything down just for the sake of it. They're not trying to get a number one pick. They've torn everything down because everyone thinks Jack Easterby is the bee's knees.
Do they even they have number one pick next year, right? They have that pick back finally?
I believe so, yes.
Oh, that would be, talk about depressing. The team that the projections are the lowest on relative to Vegas is the Los Angeles Chargers. Vegas likes Justin Herbert and Brandon Staley enough to put them over 500 at 9-8, but the Almanac projects a losing record with just 7.3 wins. Are there questions about Justin Herbert sustaining his record production as a rookie? Or is there something else going on here?
I think there's a couple of things here. I think our Chargers projection is a little too low on offense because we have them with an average offense. And I think that with Herbert, they're better than that. But the fact is, I went and looked. And it's true that in general, second-year quarterbacks take the biggest jump. Quarterbacks usually take a big jump in their second year. And then from then on, there's random bounces. But once you've gotten past year two, you know how good a quarterback is. But the fact is the best rookie quarterbacks ever did not take a big jump because they were already really good. So on average, the top 10 or 12 rookie quarterbacks dropped a little bit. They regressed towards the mean slightly. So I think that what's happening is the market is expecting Herbert to take a year two jump. And I'm expecting Herbert to stay the same. Their defense, we don't think is good. it doesn't have the players to play Brandon Staley's system. And while what Brandon Staley did with the Rams last year was awesome, the fact is there's no indication. It's a sample size of one. There's no indication that he can do that with another team. It's a problem because you want to believe that certain coaches and coordinators have huge effects on their teams. But most good coaches and coordinators, you have a sample size of one or two to figure out how good the effect is. The only coordinator, I'd say, who'd been with enough teams that you've got enough of a sample size to say that he's really meaningful is Wade Phillips. Otherwise, how much was it Staley and how much was it random chance and how much was it Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, who he doesn't have with the Chargers? So we are not projecting the Chargers to have a good defense. And then special teams, we have them projected to be much better than last year, but still the worst in the league. They have the worst projection in the league. They were so horrendously bad on special teams last year. And the most consistent thing in special teams is the thing the Chargers were worst at, which is punting. And they brought back the punter.
Yeah, I want to be very bullish on Brandon Staley. I think he's very smart. I know they've taken some steps forward there to be kind of more analytically motivated in the way that they're looking at things. So I always want to believe in that and buy into that. I think that you're right, though. I think that there might be too much good feeling about the Chargers based on, wow, this quarterback could be Dan Marino in 1984 here in this sophomore campaign. And we think that this coach is a genius. We just saw, from the Sean McVay tree, there's kind of a lot of positive, but it might be too much. And for me, it really comes back to Herbert. I think that they've done a nice job trying to protect him a little bit better. Things like, Rashawn Slater coming in through the draft, but a combination. He was great last year. He also threw 10 interceptions last year. And for every Dan Marino, there's a Carson Wentz. And I do think that we need to see how this one's going to shake out. Like you said, if he continues on the curve of a typical quarterback, starting where he started, then we're talking about one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history.
Most quarterbacks who are as good as he was as a rookie, they're already at that spot. Like on the curve, they don't get better in their second. Some do. Marino did, but most of them take a step back in their second year. A small step back, but just a little bit.
Also, he put up 115 total points earned last year, but with an IQR of just 102.5. In modern NFL, you really want to be over 100 significantly in that independent quarterback rating stat. Irregular quarterback rating, he's at 98.3. Not really setting the world on fire from an efficiency standpoint. Some of that comes back to the interceptions, 7.3 yards per attempt. Very good, but maybe not like the 9 yards per attempt that some people have in their minds for what he was doing. There were some bad games mixed in with the good ones. So I think if he were to hit that 115 points earned number again, I would bet the under on that. And I think that's similar to what you're saying.
I mean, I'm rooting for him because he was my first round pick in the Scott Fish Bowl. But personally, I'm rooting for him. But I think he's going to be about what he was last year, which you combine that with a bad running game and what we think is going to be a bad defense and bad special teams. You have a team that's not going to win more than 9 games.
I would say I expect similar to last year, but with huge error bars, partially based on the eval coming out of Oregon and what we thought he was going to be accuracy-wise coming out of there. The overperformance last year, when that sort of doesn't match, it's going to make my error bars at least be a little bit wider.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
All right. Aside from the teams that we've mentioned, who do you consider the biggest surprise of your projections?
Minnesota Vikings. We have Minnesota as a playoff team on the edge of the playoffs. They will bounce back on defense. They've added a good amount of talent. Their offense has been consistently top 10. Like, I know we all want to question Kirk Cousins, but the fact is Kirk Cousins is good.
That's where I'm at on Derek Carr also.
He's not great, but Derek Carr also. Derek Carr is good. Kirk Cousins is good. Not great, good. He's also got excellent receivers. And they've got Dalvin Cook. So we like them to bounce back. Their special teams should bounce back. Schedule strength is hard, but the chapter, Scott Spratt wrote the chapter. It goes through a lot of things that are likely to regress towards the mean about Minnesota. And so we have Minnesota on the outskirts of the playoffs this year.
I like it. Sharp money on the Vikings. All right. Which team from the bottom 10 do you like to outperform their projections?
I mean, pick would be the Chargers. We just talked about, I think the reason why I think we have the Chargers a little bit too low, although I think I would not, if I was setting Vegas over unders, I wouldn't have said 9. But of the teams in our bottom 10, they're the most likely to overperform. I think the second most likely is Carolina. If you're what would have to happen is, I think with both Carolina and Jacksonville, you would need two things to happen: a coach thing and a quarterback thing. For Carolina, you would need it to be that Sam Darnold was ruined by Adam Gase and that Joe Brady is an offensive genius like he showed at LSU. And if both of those two things are true, Carolina should very much outperform their projection. With Jacksonville, you would have to have Trevor Lawrence essentially be Andrew Luck or Russell Wilson in his rookie year. And you would have to have Urban Meyer come into the NFL with guns blazing. And if both of those things happen, Jacksonville would outperform its projection. So if you're talking about the teams in the bottom 10, other than the Chargers, I think the ones I can tell the best story about would be Carolina and Jacksonville.
I agree with those 100%. I think those are the teams. There's a lot of really good infrastructure being created kind of around that. It's is this the right quarterback in Carolina's case? And how quickly can we kind of get things moving in Jacksonville's case? It might be a year away, I think, would be conventional wisdom.
The schedule for Jacksonville in a division that we have really down this year. Like, we have the Colts as the 16th best team in win projection as the division favorite. So we have that division down to where Jacksonville could, surprise everyone and snag it.
Yeah, there's another team too. You mentioned Indianapolis. Well, what is the quarterback going to be? Tell me how Wentz is going to be, and I'll tell you what I think of the Colts this year.
You want your big error bars? There's your big error bars.
Yeah. The team I was looking at, it's funny, from the bottom 10 is Chicago. I'm like, man, if Justin Fields can get in there and be a fraction of what they need at the quarterback position, then that's juicy. But hard to trust everything going on in Chicago.
Number one projected hardest schedule. Although that change, obviously, both the Minnesota and Chicago schedules are dependent on Aaron Rodgers not getting traded.
Assuming that he's there. Interesting. All right. Well, one more final game that we've got to play before I let you out of here. The notes say we've got to play at least one round of the random page game. So for anybody who doesn't know the rules, I will pick a random page from the book. I will explain what I see, and Aaron will say something interesting. So page 305 is what we have landed on. And we've got four running backs listed on this page. David Johnson, Duke Johnson, the dreaded D Johnsons that screw up a lot of analysis that doesn't use player IDs. And then Kerryon Johnson and Ty Johnson also on this list. Aaron, any fun facts on any of these guys? Anything we should be looking for from the Houston running backs from last year?
The amazing thing about the Houston running game last year was that David Johnson, I know Rivers criticizes him in the player comment, but he really wasn't the problem. The fact is the rest of their running backs were horrific. And so they almost were the worst running game we have ever measured. But because of everybody else, David Johnson, especially once he had two good games at the end of the year, actually came out slightly above average. Duke Johnson came out horrific. I don't think anybody would realize how bad Duke Johnson was in 77 carries last year, 3.1 yards per carry, minus 45.1% DVOA. And then the other shocking stat on this page is, this is small sample size again, but how good Kerryon Johnson was as a receiver over the last 2 years. 9.8 yards per catch last year, 12.7 the year before, could be a useful piece behind Miles Sanders for the Eagles now. And I'm not quite sure why Detroit cut him.
Yeah, if you think DeAndre Swift is going to handle a lot of that same role, I understand it in that regard, but I'm with you. A good receiver. Kind of funny. Duke Johnson probably should just be a slot receiver at this point. And then David Johnson, looking through the notes, and one that I think is really telling, never been a good zone running back, but the Texans continue to believe he is. I think that's a reasonable comment there, just based on who the player actually has been. The Johnsons is who we ended up on. That's fun.
Ty Johnson, I have absolutely nothing to say about. Probably not going to be the Jets starting running back.
Ty Johnson was on two teams in 2020, and I couldn't tell you who they were.
One of them was the Jets.
All right. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for coming back onto the Off the Charts podcast. It has been ridiculously fun. I have thoroughly enjoyed myself. The Almanac, where can people go get it? Please let them know.
So we're doing a cool thing this year with the digital edition. So to get the online Almanac, you need to be an FO Plus subscriber. The good thing is we're doing a really cool promotion right now where you get an annual subscription to FO Plus for just $1 a week. And that gets you all of our Kubiak preseason projection tool, the in-season fantasy projections, all the new fantasy football tools we're going to be introducing, and the Almanac. Then the Almanac, the team pages, there are actually online articles you can read, not just a PDF. There's actually online versions of them. Or if you want the physical book, you can go to Amazon, or you can get to Amazon through footballoutsiders.com. And the physical book is now on sale at Amazon. So footballoutsiders.com gets you links to both the electronic edition and the physical book, or you can go right to Amazon for the physical book and search for Football Outsiders Almanac 2021.
Don't care if you like the old school way, the new school way. Either way, you got to get the Almanac. It is the guide to the NFL season every year. On the SIS side, look out. The SIS Football Analytics Challenge is underway. We are supporting the Boys and Girls Club of America. It's not too late to compete. We're going to have the finals of the competition will be on August 4th at 8 p.m. Our judges have been announced, and they will include Aaron Schatz and yours truly. So we will both be there. We're actually going to have 2 tracks this year. So if you're still trying to compete, definitely log on, check it out. You can form a team. There's still plenty of time to get in on the competition. But if you're interested in just showing up for the finals and seeing what we've got going, maybe donating some money to the Boys and Girls Clubs, the judges will include Kyle Brigetti from the Detroit Lions, Najee Good, 8-year NFL veteran, Seth Walder from ESPN, Aaron, I mentioned, Johnny Avello, the Las Vegas legend and current DraftKings sportsbook director, and Rick Neuheisel, former NFL offensive coordinator, head coach. You all know him. So we've got a really great group of judges. Super excited to see all of the great research that goes on. We're going to have 3 finalists from each track, and that'll be going down on August 4th. From 8 p.m., we'll start the football track. 9 p.m., we'll start the betting track, and it should be awesome.
I'm looking forward to it. Definitely. A lot of really interesting research came out of last year.
Good research and a couple of people that made it to bigger jobs out of that, which is also obviously part of the goal. All right. Thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you to our guest, Aaron Schatz, our producer, Justin Stein. We will be out of here. Aaron, you got to get over to Twitchland.
Yes.
We'll catch you over there. For all the people I just mentioned, thank you for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast.